Happy Sabbath, Saints. Welcome once again to our Bible reading summary. This past week we've been looking at Romans chapter 6, and today we'll conclude with Romans chapter 12. And in quick summary, when we begin with chapter 6, Paul focuses on the issue of baptism. And there's some important points that come out as Paul summarizes why we're baptized. Never mind the fact that there are several forms of baptism in the world, but in the Bible sense, baptism has great significance because Paul begins by saying that we are baptized into Christ. And baptism is a reflection of the death and resurrection of Christ. Remember, Christ dies, Christ goes into the grave, Christ comes out. We ourselves, we are buried into the watery grave, and then we come out of the water, and we actually hold our breath for a few seconds, do we not? Signifying that we have died. And then we come out, and as soon as you come out, you take your first breath, and you've come out with newness of life. And Christ and Paul also says that we die the death of Christ, we are baptized into Christ, we are raised into his resurrection, we live his sinless life, we are crucified with him, and we are dead from sin as Christ died, and we are alive in newness of life. And notice here that the central figure of all of this is Christ. We are not dying our own death, because my death is not atoning. It cannot save anyone, but Christ's death is the one that saves all of us. And so our death is connected to Christ's death so that it has some relevance. Then we move on to chapter 7, where Paul goes into that popular discourse of the man who struggles. He wills and he desires to do good, but he continues to fall. And he does that which he does not want to do. And that which he wants to do, he cannot do. And so one of the most important points that we find in this chapter, is that in chapter 7 of Romans, verse 18, he says that to will is present. I want to do that which is good, but to perform I cannot. And so why is it that he only has a will? He only desires, but he does not have the power. If we turn to Philippians chapter 2, verse 13, we find the answer. And there Paul once again says that it is God who works in us to will and to do his pleasure. So in of myself, I as an individual can desire to do good, but without that connection to Christ, I can do no good. But if I open my mind and my heart to the influence of God's Spirit, God will put his will in me to do good and gives me the strength to do good. If we then move on to chapter 8, it connects with chapter 7, and you find here that Paul starts to speak about the mind, the power of the mind. This great controversy that we're existing in is really a battle for the mind. It's about whose control that you're under. And under the same chapter, he says that we are slaves. We are under bondage. We are under the control of someone. We are not an independent entity within ourselves. We're either influenced by the power of the devil, or we're influenced by the power of God through Jesus Christ's Spirit. And so this battle for the mind comes out in the fact that when your mind is spiritual, your actions become spiritual. When your mind is carnal, your actions are expressed through carnal activity. And so it's also a natural process to say when your mind is spiritual, you will be led by the Spirit. In everything that you do, the Spirit guides your thought process, and those thoughts are expressed through spiritual actions, living a holy life. If we then connect chapters 9 to 11, Paul then gets into a great burden that he has for his kinsmen, the Jews. You'll remember that Paul was a Jew himself, born of the tribe of Benjamin, and he had this struggle. He was assigned to the Gentiles. That was his mission. But he always kept looking back to say, what about my people? What about the Jews? As he saw the Jews continuing to slip further and further away from the gospel. Now, here is the problem that Paul has. He says that my people are lost. They've heard the gospel, but they hardened their hearts. And because they hardened their hearts, God then turned to the Gentiles. He looked for a people amongst the Gentiles, And Paul continues to then speak about prophecies in the book of Isaiah, for example, where Isaiah says that I will turn from you and look to a nation that did not know me, and they shall be mine. But there's hope, because Paul summarizes it by saying that there's a remnant amongst the Jews, the literal Jews in Israel, Palestine today, who shall accept the gospel. And if you look into this issue, you'll actually find that there are Jews that have been accepting the gospel, seeing the connections, and they are coming into the faith at this moment as we speak. And so a great work is happening amongst the Jews today, just as Paul had hoped for. And even God himself said a remnant would be found. And so if we all come and accept Christ, Christ is the central figure in which we come into, and we join one body and we have one faith. And then we finally conclude with chapter 12, where Paul speaks of issues of spiritual gifts. And in the church, we all have a gift, and we're to use that gift for the church's edification, to exhort and to administer and push the church. And then he concludes by speaking about several ways in which we are to live a Christian godly life. For example, he talks about not doing our business in a lazy manner, but doing it with perfection. He also speaks about doing good to those that hurt us, not being vengeful, and overcoming evil with good. So this summarizes our verses and chapters for the week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.